And now, my son, go thy way. Declare the word with truth and soberness, that thou mayest bring souls unto repentance, that the great plan of mercy may have claim upon them.
Welcome to the podcast, Truth and Soberness, declaring the word through Come Follow Me. Your hosts for this show are Jason Hunter and Jeff Hicks.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Truth and Soberness. We're moving on in our studies of Genesis, and this week we have some chapters in Abraham that we're going to be looking at as well. So we'll turn the mic right over to Jason to get us started.
Yeah, thank you. The last time we were studying the Old Testament back in 2022, I guess it would have been, a friend of mine introduced me to a book on Abraham, and I was absolutely blown away by this book. It's called The Blessings of Abraham, Becoming a Zion People by E. Douglas Clark. So anyone that wants to go look that up, I highly recommend this book. In fact, I don't know that I've recommended a book more highly than this one. The purpose of the book, he said, was to create a comprehensive biography of Abraham. There are thousands of sources of information on Abraham, but none of them corroborated and put together and put into one volume. And that's what this book is. And I learned so much about Abraham and came to appreciate him so much. In fact, I came away believing that Abraham and Sarah were the most Christ-like people that have ever lived, excluding the Savior himself, of course, but that if any mortal had ever come close, it was Abraham and Sarah, and they are just wonderful. And this book just brings them to life.
Jason, what's the name of that book again? Can you re-mention?
Yeah, it is called The Blessings. I'm sorry, let me pull this up real quick. Yeah, The Blessings of Abraham, Becoming a Zion People. And the author is E. Douglas Clark.
Good to know. When we talk about Abraham, there's a few things that come clear in my mind, and one of them is he was an individual who rose to prominence spiritually, probably a lot due to the trials that he had in his life, and Sarah as well. And so perhaps we can use Abraham's example when we think of our own lives and think, sometimes when we're right in the middle of our trials and we're struggling along, if we can just keep our sights set on the end game, which is getting through those and learning from them, then we can grow spiritually. And I think that that's a large part of why Abraham and his wife rose to such greatness.
Agreed. And I think that there is a lesson for us all in there, because we'll talk about covenants a lot as we study Abraham. And Abraham and Sarah were promised certain things through covenant with the Lord, and they had to wait a very long time for those promises to come about. But they didn't wallow in self-misery or why is this not happening or anything like that. They trudged ahead with perfect faith in the Lord. And some of these promises took decades. But and some of them, when it comes to posterity being as numberless as the stars in the sky or the sands of the sea, they're still not completely fulfilled. That's going to be a future thing as well. But they had no lack of faith in the Lord and his not only ability to fulfill his covenants, but the fact that he would do it. And through their trials, through their waiting on the Lord, they were blessed immensely. And they blessed those around them while they were waiting for the Lord to fulfill his covenants. They built Zion in their own marriage, they built Zion in their own house, and then they built Zion around them. And I think that's what we can take from that today, is that while we're waiting on the promises of the Lord to be kept in our own lives, get busy doing good and bless those around you, and have faith.
That's a wonderful thought. Yeah, it's part of life, it seems like. In this life, we're meant to have joy and to find happiness. And we know that along with that comes whatever difficulties we have. And there are numerous. And if we can keep a good, solid attitude and just keep pressing on, we'll be just fine.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Abrahamic covenant. One thing that I kind of see the Bible is that so far in our study, we've hit briefly upon Adam, Enoch, Noah, and then we hit Abraham. And Abraham takes up a far greater space in the literature that we have than anyone previous. And then we spend the rest of the Bible talking about Abraham's descendants, Isaac, Jacob, and then the children of Israel through Jacob. That the entire Bible is Abraham's story of his family tree. So we've spent the last few chapters talking about Abraham's ancestors. Now we'll talk about him, and then the whole rest of the Bible, we're going to be talking about his descendants. And so this all comes through Abraham, and we get the Abrahamic covenant named after him for a reason. This, like I said, he's so pivotal and so Christ-like. In the same way that the New Testament centers around Christ, the Old Testament is all built upon Abraham. So what is the Abrahamic covenant? We get this in Genesis 15. The way covenants were made, and we've talked about this with the Near Eastern emperor-vassal covenant, there was a ritual to it. One thing that two people, if they were agreeing on something, let's say they were buying land from each other, or they were making some sort of a covenant between them, they might take a bull, and they would kill this bull, and then they would cut it in half and lay two pieces on the ground, and then they would walk between it and make the covenant. And they called it cutting a covenant. That was the language that they used. And so if you cut a covenant with someone, blood was spilt, and you walked between the carcass, and you each held each other to the covenant. If either of you were to break the covenant, the saying was, if I break this covenant, then may what happened to the ox happen to me. That there was a covenant curse involved, and basically saying, I'm pledging this on my life that this covenant is sure. Well, in Genesis 15, God makes a covenant with Abraham, and they do the same thing. They pull these animals together. I don't remember what all was involved. Let's see. There was a bull, goats, and then they put them all down there, and God alone walked between the carcasses of these animals and made a promise to Abraham. This was not a bilateral covenant. This was not saying that Abraham's not promising anything at this point. The Lord is promising all of this to Abraham. And because there's nothing greater than God, God is basically swearing on himself. He's saying, by my name, I'm promising this to you, Abraham, in a unbreakable, everlasting covenant. And he, some of the things that he promises him are like everlasting posterity. And that's the one that Abraham, puts a lot of stock into. He really wanted this. It says in the scriptures that he sought after the blessings of the fathers, and he wanted posterity, and he wanted to be a prince of peace. and several other things. And so God comes down and makes this everlasting, unbreakable covenant with Abraham and says, "You're going to have these things." And then we see just what kinds of trials Abram has to go through before he sees these covenants fulfilled. Um, and we even see how these covenants are still being fulfilled, and we see how people have invoked these covenants for protection throughout the ages as well.
I think it's really interesting, Jason, especially when we talk about posterity. And perhaps for those who are listening, try a little mathematic assignment. Sit down and figure out how many members of your posterity would come through 10 generations. And the way you can do that is just figure one generation after the other and how many descendants come from your generation, the first generation after you, and then the second and third, and see how quickly and exponentially that posterity builds. And after 10 generations, of course, this will be an estimate, but you can kind of see just in 10 generations how many people will come just through your posterity. It's kind of neat.
It is pretty incredible. And it's just like the Lord promised. It's like the sands of the sea. Um, and when you extrapolate that out through the centuries and everything, it's kind of amazing just how many people have the literal blood of Abraham in them. Um, and because of the children that he had, Isaac and Ishmael and others, um, major world religions all claim posterity from Abraham. You have Islam and Judaism and Christianity all referring to him as Father Abraham and Mother Sarah. And, it's because they've all descended from them and all want the same blessings that Abraham was promised.
It's kind of neat when we think about that. We're told that at some point in probably the fairly relatively near future, all of those, we'll call them religions, but all of that posterity will come together and worship the Savior. And I think that that's going to be a great day.
I agree. I wanted to go over one of the covenant blessings that I think most people aren't familiar with because it doesn't say it explicitly in the scriptures, but it's a covenant of deliverance from a mortal threat. And we'll see that Abraham was delivered on multiple occasions because he kept faith. But this covenant is invoked or referred to by the phrase, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And whenever you see that phrase, especially in the Book of Mormon, they're talking about deliverance from bondage, deliverance from some kind of a mortal threat, plagues, slavery, bondage, something like that. And it starts out when the Lord introduces himself to Abraham. We see in Abraham chapter 1, the Lord is speaking to Abraham face to face, and he introduces himself. He says, "I have come down to visit them and to destroy him who hath lifted his hand up against thee, Abraham, my son, to take away thy life." And again, my son Abraham is covenant language. So behold, I will lead thee by my hand, and I will take thee to put upon thee my name, even the priesthood of thy father, and my power shall be over thee. And then he gets to it here. He says, "As it was with Noah, so shall it be with thee. But through thy ministry, my name shall be known in the earth forever, for I am thy God." In other words, he says, I am the God of Abraham. So God has come down to deliver Abraham from death and destroy those that sought to kill him. And he introduces himself as the God of Abraham. And then we get to Jacob, Abraham's son. This is going to be later on in Genesis 32. He says, and Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord which saidst unto me, return to thy country, to thy kindred, deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me. So now Jacob is invoking the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, in order to deliver him from his danger. And then we get down into Joseph in Egypt in Genesis 50, and we start to see this phrase, delivering people. He says, it shall be done unto thee in the last days also, even as I have sworn. Therefore, Joseph said unto his brethren, God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land, unto the land which he swore unto Abraham and unto Isaac and to Jacob. And then later on, we hear Moses talking about their groanings. It said, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant. Again, there's covenant language to remember. God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And when God introduced himself to Moses, he called himself, he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And the Lord said, I have seen the affliction of my people and have heard their cry, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians. And then we start seeing this pattern all through the Book of Mormon. When Ammon finds the people of Limhi in bondage to the Lamanites, he says a prayer, and he finally exclaims to them, O people, lift up your heads and be comforted, for behold, the time is at hand, or not far distant. And he says, we will be delivered. He said, lift up your hands, rejoice, and put your trust in God, in that God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and that God who brought the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. And then he said that it is because of our iniquities that he has brought us into bondage, but he will deliver us. Alma with the people of Limhi does the same thing. He said, behold, I will show unto you that they were brought into bondage, and none could deliver them but the Lord their God, yea, even the Lord God of Abraham and Isaac and of Jacob. And so you see over and over again through the scriptures, when those three patriarchs are used in connection with, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, this is showing us a fulfillment of a covenant to deliver them from bondage. Again, it was not explicitly stated in the Genesis account when the Lord made these covenants with Abraham, but we see it done over and over and over again, not just in Abraham's life, but throughout the rest of the scriptures, that God delivers his people, and he does it because of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the covenants that were made with them. In fact, when the children of Israel were taken out of Egypt, they were wicked. They were idolaters. They hadn't merited any kind of deliverance on their own. It was because of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob that they got any kind of deliverance at all. And I think that we can apply that to ourselves as well, because sometimes we get into these situations, or we're down on ourselves, or life is not going right, or we're in some kind of bondage, or we have something to be delivered from, whether it's sickness or a hardship or whatever it is. We might feel like we don't deserve to be delivered. Sometimes when we're at our lowest, we aren't as faithful as we have felt in the past. And I think with this, we can rely on this everlasting, unbreakable promise from the Lord that he will deliver us because of what Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did, and not necessarily because of what we're doing. The promise is still sure, and we can rely on that, take strength from that, have faith in that, and wait for our deliverance, not necessarily from our own merits, but because of these great patriarchs.
That's a wonderful thought. And as you were speaking, Jason, I was thinking about perhaps there may be some listeners who are wondering how they connect in with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in that posterity. And if you quickly read the Book of Mormon account in Jacob 5, it talks about the the olive branches being grafted in, so to speak. And it's a good representation of how that works. So we believe through the scripture accounts that when we are baptized in the church, then we become literal descendants uh, through those branches. And in fact, when you receive your patriarchal blessing, you will understand your that posterity even better. And so it's something to think about and to remember that you become literal descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob through that posterity.
Yeah. And the way those covenants worked, it didn't matter that if you were not the literal descendant of the emperor, right? When you were a faithful vassal and the emperor adopted you and started calling you son, you were the son of the emperor at that point. You received everything. It's like when Jesus says, that those who believe on him will receive all that the Father hath. Well, we receive those things not because we have earned them or are a literal heir, but we are made an heir through Christ. And in this way, like you said, by joining the church, we are made an heir of Abraham and are entitled to all of the Abrahamic blessings that were given to him and passed on through his lineage. And so, it doesn't matter if you can't find a genealogical link to Abraham. When you join the church, when you make those covenants with the Lord, you are adopted or made a descendant of Abraham in every single way possible, lacking nothing, and can partake of those covenants.
What a wonderful thought. And perhaps that would be a good incentive for us to go and study closely that Abrahamic covenant and all of the wonderful blessings that are promised through those various branches of that family tree.
One of the things, as I said, the thing that he seemed to put most stock in was having descendants, having an heir, because he was a full-grown adult and had no children yet, and it's often seen as a covenant blessing to have lots of posterity, and it's seen or was then as a covenant curse if you didn't have any descendants. If you were childless or barren, people would wonder about you. So, well, what is this guy doing wrong that God has cursed him that he's not having any kids? And so he's seeking after that. And when the Lord blesses him and says, "You will have descendants," Abraham says, "Well, you know what? I don't have any children. I've gone ahead and made my steward my heir, so that when I die, he inherits everything." And the Lord tells him, "No, I don't mean by proxy or by heir. I mean that you will have children, and you through those children will have descendants, greater than the sands of the sea." And the morning after, so Abraham is having this cosmic vision with the Lord and having all these blessings and stuff, face to face communication. And the next day, he's told to go into Egypt, and he takes Sarah into Egypt, and this is going to be the first test, not only just for Abraham but also Sarah, of putting their faith in the Lord about descendants, because as they start to go into Egypt, it was kind of the custom that anybody coming in would kind of be waylaid by these advanced scouting parties. They'd kind of go through and find out who's coming in, what's their business and stuff like that. But they would also look for beautiful women to join Pharaoh's harem. And it was, here's their morality. It was against the law, or it was immoral for Pharaoh to take another man's wife. But it was not immoral for them to kill that man, and then Pharaoh could take his wife to him at that point. And so they knew this going in there. The stories say that Sarah was one of the most beautiful women in the world, and they knew that going into Egypt, Abraham would have a target on his back. The Lord tells him, say that she's your sister. We can't have them thinking that you guys are married or you're going to be killed. And trust me on this, it's going to work out. So the Lord tells Abraham to do this. Abraham asks Sarah to do this. He doesn't command it or tell her. He says, "Please do this for me." And when they get waylaid, they say, "Oh, whose wife are you?" And she's like, "I'm his sister." And so they're like, "All right, we've got this gorgeous woman. We're going to take her to Pharaoh. She's going to be part of his harem." And Abraham, you're good to go. In fact, hey, let's set you up in the city here. You seem like a decent guy, and here we go. Well, this test of sacrificing his wife, essentially, we would get later on where he's asked to sacrifice Isaac, through whom all of the blessings would come. Well, it starts with Sarah, and he essentially puts her in the Lord's hands and says, "Here you go, I trust you." And this ordeal lasted at least 2 years that they were separated. And she's in Pharaoh's harem, but every time Pharaoh comes to do anything with her, he's found to be impotent. He can't do anything, and so he starts to wonder what's going on. And after a while, he starts coming down with all these diseases and curses and plagues, and not only him but everybody in his household. And it kind of reminds me of the later plagues in Egypt when Moses is trying to get the children of Israel out of there. And so Pharaoh figures out this has to do with Sarah somehow. So he asks not only Sarah, but also Lot about Abraham's relationship with her. And he figures out that they were married, that he's her husband. He's like, "Oh my gosh, I've committed this horrible thing by trying to take another man's wife." And he sends this huge gift to Abraham: gold, silver, diamonds, pearls, sheep, oxen, men and women slaves, and a residence in the precincts of the royal palace. I mean, he is going to lay this on him if he will forgive Pharaoh for this transgression and cure him and fix all of this. And Abraham turns it all down. He said, I won't accept any of this stuff from you. And so the Pharaoh is beside himself. He has no idea how to fix this. And Pharaoh has a dream. And in this dream, it showed Abraham laying his hands on his head and healing him. And so the Pharaoh goes and sends for Abraham and asks him to bless him and to cure him from all of this. And so Abraham and Sarah have been separated for 2 years. And Abraham has been patiently waiting, praying, pleading for 2 years that this would all end. And it comes down that the person who he should hate the most in this situation asks him for a blessing and asks him to heal him. And Abraham doesn't hesitate. He goes in, he heals Pharaoh, and basically cures all the plagues of Egypt that have been plaguing him and his household. And Pharaoh, at that point, sets up Abraham. We have Abraham sitting on Pharaoh's throne. Pharaoh does to Abraham what another Pharaoh later on down the line would kind of do with Joseph. He makes him like second in command of all of Egypt. He exalts him and gives him riches beyond belief and gives him the authority to preach throughout all the land of Egypt. And so Abraham does, and I want to say that he introduces the entire temple experience to the Egyptians. If we look now, if you look up Bruce Porter on YouTube and look at some of the kind of breakthroughs that he has had in deciphering these temple traditions in Egypt that completely mirror our own temple experiences today, you'll see that they have the same source. I mean, the Egyptians had a legitimate, true temple experience given to them, and it all comes through Abraham at this point. So the Lord speaks to him face to face in this cosmic vision, puts him through a heartbreaking and horrible trial, and Sarah too, because she's in on this as much as Abraham is, being tested and tried. And after 2 years of suffering and waiting, the end result is that they are exalted to Pharaoh type level and given free reign to preach the true word of God to all the Egyptians and to establish temple worship, true temple worship, and ordinances and covenants throughout all the land of Egypt. And who knows how many people benefited from that in the end. It's just incredible to consider all of the ramifications of that, but they were tried and tested and just tugged at their heartstrings for 2 years.
This is one of those stories, the story of Abraham and Sarah in Egypt. It's one of those stories that you can't help, especially as a man, you can't help but empathize with Abraham and think, wow, how did he manage to make it that long, knowing the situation and the way it was all set up? And I think it's important, especially when we take stories like this, it's important that we, even though we're living in our modern day, we have the eyes of an understanding of our own day. But we have to look back and realize that these people lived a different existence, different society, different laws, different types of government, and relations with between the government and the people and so forth. And I think throughout especially the Old Testament, but even in the New Testament and other scriptures, we have to understand that that we cannot use our modern day view of things and place that on the backdrop of some of these real stories that are taking place in the Old Testament, and just understand that we can pull the information from those stories that is important for us to know on a spiritual level, and realize that things were so much different back in those days.
Yeah, their morality and our morality were completely different. We can't superimpose our morality and views on them, nor should we look at how they did things and think, well, that was what God intended at the time. It's just how it was at the time. They aren't necessarily, just because we read about, how they did things in the Bible. Because at this time, Abraham and Sarah were equals in every way. That she did not walk a step behind him, and yet in the rest of their society, women held absolutely no societal status. They were property, and the only status they had was either that of their father if they were unmarried, or that of their husband if they were married. This we shouldn't think that that was how God prescribed it. That's just how it was. And these people lived among them, and they did their best among them. Just like in our society today, we have things that we say are moral or right that, Abraham and Sarah would probably balk at it and say, you guys, you need to change your thinking about this. This is not what God intends. You need to straighten up. So, like you said, it's important to understand that there were huge differences between them and us, but there are some universal things like love and charity and generosity and stuff like that that transcend the ages. It doesn't matter who or when you are, those types of things exist and can make you a better person.
And to that point, I think it's always important to continually ask yourselves, what can I pull from this information that will be helpful for me as a person living in 2026? And there are a lot. These very foundational spiritual principles that we can pull and say, okay, this applies to me. and I can learn to be a better person based on this person's example. And and perhaps that is why it's so important that we understand the covenant language and understand how that applies to us as well as the way it did back in those ancient times.
Yeah. One of the things I think that we can easily apply to ourselves is service and generosity. I pointed out how quick Abraham was to bless Pharaoh, who really deserved no generosity from Abraham. But when asked for a blessing, he goes to his worst enemy, his bane, and blesses him, and holding nothing back. And Abraham was known for his generosity. He was searching after Zion. He wanted a Zion community. He wasn't terribly far removed from Enoch's Zion and Noah's memories of that. He wasn't terribly far from that. It was still kind of in the memory of myths and legends and stuff. And he's looking for that. One of the key pieces of Zion is that there were no poor among them. And it wasn't that, everybody was rich. It's just that they didn't allow poverty to be among them. And Abraham was known to never take a meal without having a guest. He couldn't stand that he was eating something and someone else might be out there not eating something. We see later when three visitors come to his tent to give the blessings to him and Sarah of posterity. He would sit in the door of his tent and look for people wandering along the roads and invite them in, and Sarah would cook for them. And if a storm was coming up, he would send his servant out into the storm saying, gosh, there's got to be somebody out there. See if you can't find somebody that we can help. Maybe bring them into the tent during the storm. We can give them something to eat. He actively looked for ways to bless the poor and the needy around him, and he sought to elevate everybody. When we talk about all of these riches being given to him from Egypt and everything, he didn't go out and start living like a king. He went out and started establishing little communities of followers, and he and Sarah started up like what would the equivalent of like soup kitchens, where they would make mass meals and invite everybody in. And while people are sitting down and eating, they would preach to them, and they would teach them all about Jesus, and they would get baptisms, and they would get people coming through their own temple experiences. We'll see later where Abraham builds altars all around in the land. Well, in some of these other Abrahamic sources, he's not just building altars, he's building permanent temples and a traveling tabernacle, much like Moses had. And he's taking the gospel, the elevated gospel of Jesus Christ, to as many people as he can. And while he's doing it, he's feeding them and he's clothing them and he's providing for their basic needs and he's elevating them and just making Zion everywhere that he goes.
That's such
and we can do that too.
Absolutely. It's such an interesting thought to think about that span of time. As an analyst working professionally, gathering data, and one of my focuses was on the socio-geographical progress that people make. And I think that it's interesting with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then Jacob's sons. You think of those 4 generations and all of the impact that they had from Abraham, starting with Abraham, and then clear down to Israel's sons. And if you overlay that social impact between Egypt and the land of Israel and Canaan and those areas, and then understand all of the various things that were happening from the time of Abraham clear down through Joseph, and we can just use Joseph for those 4 generations. It's so fascinating to see the impact and the growth, the community growth, and the national expanding growth geographically and socially during those times. It's pretty fascinating.
It is, and it's even bigger than we think because the Bible is the story of Abraham's descendants through Jacob. But Esau had lots of descendants. And if you look at Isaac, Ishmael was just as prolific. In fact, you have the 12 tribes of Israel or Jacob, but you also have 12 sons of Ishmael. And so they have 12 of their own tribes that have branched out and filled the Middle Eastern and Eastern worlds with believers. In fact, a lot of the sources say that, we read in Genesis, it's very limited that Abraham sent Ishmael away, kind of pushing him out into the desert to die alone. But the other accounts say that Abraham gave Ishmael and his mom like loaded down with gifts and gold and food and everything, and said, you've got to go, but here, take all of this stuff. And they didn't lose contact. Abraham was in constant contact with Ishmael. Ishmael had the priesthood and presided over temples and tabernacles on his own. We often think of the priesthood only coming through Judah and coming up through Joseph. But Moses, when he was out in the wilderness, received the priesthood through his father-in-law Jethro, who was not of any of the tribes of Israel. He came through the Midianites, who were another descendant of Abraham. And so Abraham has lots of righteous descendants who have gone out and spread the gospel and spread the priesthood and spread covenants throughout all of the world. Sometimes we focus our vision just on the 12 tribes of Israel. And in fact, it is much larger than that and much more encompassing than that. But it's everywhere.
That's so wonderful to think about. And it just goes right back to those promises given to Abraham regarding his posterity. And it would do us well to mark those various branches, understand who's who, and realize that all of the people on the earth, in one way or another, come through those branches.
And not one branch is more important than the other. The promises to Abraham apply equally to all. We can't say that, because we come through, the tribe of Ephraim that we're, getting any other blessings of Abraham because of that. No, it is the blessings of Abraham, and they belong to all people. And we need to do our own part in fulfilling those by blessing people in the same way that Abraham blessed everyone that he came in contact with. We need to bless everyone that we come in contact with, and we need to share the gospel, and we need to love them. I mean, he just loved people. He and Sarah were just full of charity and the pure love of Christ. And that's something that we can work on no matter where we're at currently and improve upon.
What a great thought. I wonder, Jason, if before we wrap up, if we could just close with a few words on Melchizedek. As we know, Melchizedek was a prominent individual during that period of time. And maybe we could discuss just a little bit about him so we understand his purpose a little better.
Yeah, they were contemporaries. We don't really know who Melchizedek was. There are some speculations that he was Shem, actually the son of Noah, just because of some kind of hierarchies in the priesthood. Some mention Melchizedek, some mention Shem. Neither one of them mentioned both of them together, and so some people have kind of put together that they might be the same. We don't know. We know that he was one of two people, two mortals, referred to as a Prince of Peace. You have Melchizedek and Abraham, both contemporaries, both a Prince of Peace. Melchizedek, much like Enoch, came into a land that was completely wicked, and then spent his time ministering unto them and preaching and working among them, and made it pretty much another Zion on earth. Now, his Zion may not have been taken up like Enoch's Zion was, but it was nonetheless equal. The name, they call him the King of Salem. That gets its root from Jerusalem. It means peace. We don't know if Salem and Jerusalem are the same place or not, and it doesn't really matter. But Melchizedek was the king of Salem, the Prince of Peace, and he was the legitimate or the authorized high priest. If we were to say anyone were the prophet of the time, drawing a parallel with us in today's day, President Oaks is our presiding high priest. We call him the prophet, but his position is presiding high priest. That would be Melchizedek, and Melchizedek received Abraham, and Abraham paid tithes to him. And so the law of tithing was just as much a valid law then as it is now. And Abraham had amassed a vast wealth. I mean, everywhere he went, he used wealth to better the people around him. And like what we saw in Egypt, because of his sacrifice and his long suffering and his faithfulness to his covenants, he walked out of Egypt with wealth numbering almost that of Pharaoh himself. And so when it comes time to pay tithes, he goes to Salem, he goes to Melchizedek and says, hey, I'm here to pay tithes to you. I recognize you as the presiding high priest, and I wish to receive blessings from you as well. They break bread and have wine, much like the sacrament would be, and Melchizedek blesses Abraham. It's another beautiful example of keeping covenants, of keeping commandments, receiving blessings, and of two absolutely stellar individuals meeting up and probably just enjoying a deep brotherhood together in the gospel of Christ.
That's a great story. I would encourage any of our listeners to dig into that, drill down a little further, and find some things regarding that relationship between Abraham and Melchizedek that perhaps would be applicable to you in some way. I think it would be very interesting.
I think it's also interesting that those two, we call the priesthood the Melchizedek priesthood, in order to avoid vain repetition of the name of God, because the priesthood is after the order of the Son of God. But Melchizedek was such an example, or such a archetype of righteous priesthood usage, that we give it his name. And in the same breath, we have the new and everlasting covenant that comes through Abraham. And so you've got these two pillars of righteousness meeting together. That had to have been absolutely epic when you figure just how pivotal they have been in the entire world history and future of things.
Thanks for listening to Truth and Soberness, declaring the word through Come Follow Me. This show was produced by Voice Right Media. Any reproductions or copying of any content of this show are strictly prohibited without the written consent of the owners.